So today we're going to talk about the differences between sport rule versus policy versus legislation, the different ways different rules can be proposed to change, to be proposed for different amendments for legislation and policy. So a lot of what's covered today will kind of come from a perspective of that we first see this from the coaches level, because a lot of coaches being with their coaches association, larger numbers, a lot more discussion in that realm. So we'll start from that very bottom level of a sport rule and then moving into policy and into finally legislation. So sport rule are those specific rules that are dictated for on-field conduct and playing of the game. The NAIA has adopted the NCAA rulebook in nearly all sports except for tennis, golf, competitive cheer and dance, and competitive cheer and dance. Of course, the NAIA has created that rulebook specifically. So what you see is what has been guided again from the NCAA perspective. Changes that come from the NCAA that are then voted on into their rulebook is essentially adopted by the NAIA through the National Administrative Council. The NAC is the council that oversees all coaches associations, and they oversee specific rules for sports and postseason competition. So you'll see some general sport rules that might be a little bit different in the NAIA than you will see in the NCAA, but for the most part, it is pretty uniform. So you will see different things like the suspensions resulting from ejections are, we do honor the sport rule in that regard, as well as align that with the NAIA rules. So all sport rules are found in their sport specific rule book and found on the Coaches Corner page for that specific sport. So every now and then we will get a question. Let's say like a coach is trying to ask about a practice, and he'll say, well, I looked in the rule book and I didn't say anything about a practice. This is where these conversations, if you're working with different coaches or you're a coach yourself, will come in handy to say, well, practice is actually a bylaw, and therefore you will find it in the NAIA handbook. You will not find it in the sport rule book. So examples of this include football eye shields is a NCAA rulebook requirement, back-to-back dual matches, 2 consecutive dual matches in tennis, that's Intercollegiate Tennis Association rulebook. Baseball, any of the starting players with the exception of a pitcher and designated hitter may withdraw from the game and re-enter. Again, this is NCAA / sport rule specifically. How to make a sport rule change. So if you have something that you're thinking is specific to the sport rule itself, you'll need to get with the Coaches Association. Each Coaches Association has their own exec committee and speak to them about what you think should be a rule change for the NAIA sport, how we process the sport or how we conduct the sport that might be different from the NCAA level. This must be approved by the National Administrative Council, and it will be considered an NAIA sport rule modification. And so at this time, we have quarterly NAC meetings, and at these quarterly meetings, there are specific timeframes when they hear different rule things that are coming forward, and typically it is after the Coaches Association meets for their yearly big meetings. Okay, so that is specific to the sport rules. I don't see. Morgan says, I might not stream my screen.
Has to be the same.
Yeah, but he's just, I don't know what's wrong with him. But.
Okay, thank you for helping me with that. So now we are back to the conclusion here of the sport rules section, and any pieces of questions do you have, Morgan? Any questions that you might see? Okay, awesome. I'll go ahead and continue on. So now we're at the council policy. Councils are our NAC, like I just mentioned, the National Administrative Council, who oversees sport rules. COP is our Council of Presidents, and specifically what you all might be familiar with is the financial aid limits. The TEAB limits for each sport is under COP policy. CFAR is our Council of Faculty Athletic Representatives, and they oversee eligibility policy and eligibility center decision processes. And then CSA is our Council for Student Athletes. So regulations found in the official policy section of the handbook, each governing council has specific topics that they oversee. And so it's, again, specific to NAC, all coach associations and any issues arising from coaches associations, which include sport-specific rules that goes up through that specific council. And policies can be changed at the will of the council. So it has to be done through a discussion with a liaison of the council to bring it forward to the leadership of each council. Example of policies that you might be familiar with. To be eligible for a selection of NAI postseason, a soccer team must play a minimum of 10 games against countable opponents. That's under NAC policy. Again, another NAC policy example is receiving a bid into a national championship playoff series. A football team must be rated amongst the top 20. And also a softball team can award a maximum of 10 full grant and aid equivalencies. This is a COP policy piece with the financial aid in the limits, countable limits, exemptions, and so on is found in COP. So how to make a change to a policy? Again, there's no direct, like coaches groups can't really propose something. It has to be done with the will of each council, with a liaison who can bring it forward to the leadership of the council. So for NAC, policy must be approved by the full NAC. It occurs on a quarterly basis. If approved by the council, the policy will have a final sign off of the National Coordinating Committee, who oversees all councils, and updates are published in the handbook. So you'll find those in the back sections of the handbook. Changes again to COP, CFAR, and CSA policy. Associations do not have direct line of access to propose changes in these policies. And like I said, that we have both a national office liaison and other liaison and council leadership who can take any interested bylaw changes or questions. I shouldn't say bylaw, we'll get there in a second, but policy changes, they can take that to their respective councils. I'll stop right there. Any questions with that? I lost my little chat box here, so just chime in if you have any questions. Otherwise, I will move on to the legislation piece. Okay, legislation. Anything found in the NAI Constitution or bylaws is a legislation. Any change or amendment to the Constitution or bylaws can only be done through a vote by the full membership at the annual NAIA convention. Examples of legislation. Each sport has a maximum of 24-week period to conduct all practices and competitions. That's the bylaw. A sport of football has a practice start date 24 days prior to the first allowable game. Again, a bylaw. Scores or statistics cannot be reported by the NAIA institutions involving a scrimmage, a bylaw. And students' eligibility is terminated if the student competes in 10 semesters, 15 quarters. Again, that is a bylaw. So why this discussion is key is right now we're starting to see, again, a lot of coaches meetings are starting to occur. Bylaw discussions are happening, and we want to communicate what would be appropriate for a sport rule change versus what would be appropriate for a legislation. And right now, the Article 1, Section 8H, I should say, as in Henry, that is our big frequency of play limits, start date article, bylaws, and practice definitions and things. A lot of those discussions are coming forward. And so that means we need to start discussing what legislation is and how to go through the amendment process. So how to make a change. Any association, council, or standing committee can sponsor a legislative amendment. And in some cases, co-sponsor is required. So if a coaches association brings something forward, they must have a co-sponsorship. If a group such as a conference wishes to propose something as a conference, then they would need a co-sponsor as well. So only standing committees can have their own legislation by themselves. So that would be like the National Eligibility Committee or NAC can have their own legislation without a co-sponsor. Proposals must be submitted to the national office. It's submitted to Legislative Services. And for this year, it's always submitted 90 days prior to the national convention. And so this year it's going to be January 7th is when all legislative proposals need to be submitted to us. There's not a required form to fill out. It's just you can send it to us in legislative services. And also don't worry about being too specific with the wording of thinking you have to rewrite the bylaw itself. Then you're going to bring it forward to us with the general understanding of what you wish the bylaw to do or to change. We can work with you and work through the process. We also have our National Constitution and Bylaws Committee, which is included with our National Eligibility Committee, member from our CFAR, our Council of Faculty Athletic Representatives, and a member from NAC. So our Constitution and Bylaws Committee takes all bylaw proposals, and they are the ones that actually work through specific wording and double check how the proposal will kind of counterbalance with other bylaws in the handbook, if there's something that needs to be changed so that this is not a one-off exception, it can work seamlessly into the bylaw wording as is. So that's going to be the big work of our C&B committee, Constitution and Bylaws Committee. So if you want to have something you have in mind, you want to bring forward to us, simply just email us with this idea and maybe the group that you have that you're working with to propose a change. Okay, so something that you should be mindful of, especially if you are a coach working as part of a coaches association, the big pushback or discussion, I should say, maybe beyond pushback, is about a few years ago, we did have our scheduling creep working group, and that is why our bylaws have start dates in there. And the purpose behind these start dates were to help with the student, not pushing the student athletes to come to school sooner than they needed to come to school and report to school, to help lessen the burden of a lot of our support staff, our athletic trainers, and others who felt pretty stretched thin when a lot of sports were happening at once. And so our schedule creep committee members, including athletic directors and commissioners and coaches, they came together to discuss putting together start dates that you see now that's in the handbook under Article 1, Section H. But now we've seen for the past 2 or 3 years, bylaw amendments have come forward that's basically kind of picking at different things of changing the start date from the first Thursday to the first Monday for a particular sport, or changing the practice, and so on and so forth. So the council presidents came together reviewing this at last year's convention. They wrote, the COP exec supports a resolution for a 3-year moratorium on legislative proposals requesting exceptions to the scheduled creep parameters. So again, requesting either exceptions or changes to specifically Article 1, Section H, item number 5 with the start dates. And while the COP realizes they do not have authority to prevent such legislation, they felt strongly enough to make a resolution, making it a public statement for our membership. And the resolution strongly discouraged any further changes to the legislation for a period of a couple of years, essentially a sunset period similar to what other groups like the NAC have done at times. So I shared this with you to say if a bylaw amendment were to come forward from a coaches association wishing to change like the practice start date or competition start date, even if it seems minor, again, our groups are still welcome to bring that forward. And if they meet all of the parameters, they can be officially submitted as a bylaw proposal. But having the perspective of the council presidents, and then depending on how the council presidents might influence different groups who will vote at convention, it's just an understanding that this piece is out there. And with different leadership, it might be something to take into consideration as you're moving forward and wanting to propose a bylaw that might be specific to that section of the handbook. Any questions with that? All right, continue on here. For our final discussion and section of this, we wanted to get your feedback. So bylaw amendments that reflect institutional autonomy. As part of the NAIA strategic plan for the next 3 years, we're examining specific bylaws that may impact institutional autonomy. Foundational principle of the NAIA philosophy is to respect each institution's authority over policies and operations, recognizing that flexibility allows schools to address their own unique climates, business practices, geography, and student demographics effectively. So currently there are several bylaws where we defer to an institution's practice and basically your best standards to, I would say here's some examples, such as recognizing whether if non-accredited institutions credit, if it's accepted by your institution, we will then defer to the institution's official transcript. We also defer to an institution's perspective and policy on repeats. So there's things in there that are part of an eligibility component that we're looking at, but this could be wider. This could be how we define what a senior women's leader is, for example, or how we define what a faculty athletic representative is, for example. This can be very broad range across the full spectrum of the NAIA and all of our bylaws and policies. So we want to get your insight on this. You can help us out by chiming in now or chiming into the chat, or we can have one-on-one discussions about this through myself with Morgan. And we want to get your insight and what you think might be current bylaws where you feel need to have the benefit of greater institutional autonomy, where basically the national bylaw is not over-governing too much into that fact, and that we are allowing for more institutions to have their say in different rules. So basically, yeah, what bylaws would you like to see addressed? So you can call or email us to discuss this further, but I'll go ahead and stop there. This is the conclusion of this particular presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can open it up for general questions or questions for this particular section, this particular question. Anything that you guys may have? So I would love to see the repeat rule be reviewed. And I do believe, Sylvania, that is coming for sure this year. Our Council of Faculty Athletic Representatives have discussed how we might remove basically the repeat rule and to defer to the institutions and how to treat the repeats. But yes, love that idea. And we definitely have that on our radar for sure. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, so next week we will be doing another presentation, and this is going to be on certification, bylaw policies, bylaw applications for certification. And then the following week, prior to Thanksgiving, we will do the ECP actual technology process, and this is going to be talking about how we will go forward to recertify and going into the next term. So look out for that next week, next Wednesday at noon Central Time. Again, we'll do a policy bylaw review of how to certify mid-year, and then we'll go into a more technical approach the following week before we go into Thanksgiving. So the question is, how do we have access to this recording? We will post this on the Legislative Rules Ed website. So you can email us if you have any questions to that extent. Loved hearing from you guys today and seeing you all. Thank you for tuning in. Very quick work here today, but we will see you guys again next week. Thank you so much.